Did you know there was just a bill introduced into the Texas state legislature that if it becomes a law would make it a crime for a transgender man to represent to his employer that he is a man? In this video, I'm going to discuss the proposed Texas state law and how it conflicts with federal anti-discrimination statutes. And stay tuned to the end because I'm going to share a short but legendary debate that took place in the Texas state legislature on whether they should criminalize sodomy. Okay, so this proposed Texas state law is aimed at prohibiting what it calls gender identity fraud. Here's the language of the proposed law, but in sum, the law prohibits identifying to the government or an employer that your sex is anything other than the sex you were assigned at birth. If passed, this would become a crime in Texas punishable by up to 2 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. I know that's a lot to take in, and there's a ton to discuss. But I'm going to keep this video focused on the employment aspect. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And the question is, what does sex cover? Does it extend to gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation? Well, this question was answered by the Supreme Court in 2020 in a decision called Bostock v. Clayton County. Justice Neil Gorsuch found that discriminating against an individual on the basis of their sexual orientation or because they're transgender is necessarily discrimination on the basis of sex and a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Justice Gorsuch provided the following explanation. Or take an employer who fires a transgender person who was identified as a male at birth, but who now identifies as a female. If the employer retains an otherwise identical employee who was identified as female at birth, the employer intentionally penalizes a person identified as male at birth for traits or actions that it tolerates in an employee identified as female at birth. Justice Gorsuch went on to find that for an employer to discriminate against employees for being homosexual or transgender, the employer must intentionally discriminate against individual men and women in part because of sex. That has always been prohibited by Title VII's plain terms, and that should be the end of the analysis. So, is it possible for this proposed Texas state law to coexist with federal anti-discrimination laws? I don't think so. I mean, what is the point of federal workplace protections on the basis of sex, which, as the Supreme Court held, includes transgender status, if an employer can then report that employee as having committed a crime based on the same protected transgender status? This proposed Texas law completely undermines federal anti-discrimination laws. Time will tell whether this proposed bill becomes a Texas state law, but before it does, there will almost certainly be a debate on the floor of Texas's state Congress on this law. So I will leave you with this legendary debate that took place in the Texas State Congress in 1993, where they discussed whether to pass a law criminalizing sodomy.
I want to read this to you. It's quite offensive to me to have to read it in public. That's the way we make law. We're fixing to tell you what it is. A person commits an offense if a person engages in a sexual act involving the sexual organ of one person with the anus of another. And that is a Class C misdemeanor under this section of the law.
Madam
I
Speaker,
move for adoption.
will the gentleman yield?
For what purpose, Ms. Danberg, will you yield, Mr. Chisholm?
I yield.
The gentleman yields, Ms. Danberg.
Mr. Chisholm, you're saying this is a significant change in the law, and yet you have it as a Class C misdemeanor. What's the penalty range for a Class C misdemeanor?
If you were in my county, it could be hanging.
Mr. Chisholm, do you not
Probably
know?
$500 in this county, but that's all right. And they probably would hang you for doing this in my county if they caught you.
A Class C misdemeanor is the same level of crime as a traffic ticket. Is that right?
I'm assuming that a traffic ticket, if you were doing something that they're going to fine you $500, they could probably do that. But it's not necessarily they have to fine you that much. That's a maximum. But I'd be willing to take an amendment to move that to a Class A or a felony or even a 3G offense if you'd so choose to do that, if you want to do that.
You're trying to criminalize behavior between people of the opposite sex. Is that correct?
That's right.
Even if they're married?
More especially if they're married.
Even if they...
can't believe anyone would do that if they was married.
Even if it's consensual. Is that right?
Under any circumstances. The
Even
most
if
gross
they
circumstances you
slip.
can imagine.
Even if they slip. Is that right, Mr. Chisholm?
Well, I guess you could accidentally speed. But a violation of the law is a violation of the law.
Okay, Warren. As to not embarrass you, we'll
I'm
use
trying.
me as an example. Say my husband and I were having intercourse and he slipped. And it touched my anus. Do I need to go turn myself in to some health official?
I would suggest you see a doctor about his aim.